spent 3 nights on board. It's not an aircraft carrier, a cruiser, or a submarine. It's a ship that probably most of you have not even heard of. This is a San Antonio-class amphibious assault ship, and I did fly into it, but not on an MV-22 Osprey. I flew into the belly of this beast on a hovercraft. The amount of design elements incorporated throughout this ship is insane. From mundane things that you wouldn't even think of, like how much force should be required to open and close the doors, to curious things, like why are all the handrails mounted crooked? I'll explain all that and much more. Oh wait, this ship sometimes puts on a light show. How bringing women on board surface combatants make things much more comfortable for men. And why the Navy is downgrading the future iterations of this class by designing it to be less capable is not what you think. With a displacement of 25,000 tons, San Antonio-class ships are the largest U.S. warships. Well, besides those ships that have a flight deck from bow to stern, such as supercarriers and some amphibious assault ships. Also known as a landing platform dock or LPD-17 class, these ships have a massive flight deck that accommodates the operation of 2 MV-22 Ospreys near simultaneously, which I got to witness firsthand. Ospreys are pretty loud, so everyone was wearing earplugs. The ship also carries 319,000 gallons of aircraft fuel, which is about half the volume of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Speaking of swimming pools, another key feature is the large well deck that can house 2 landing craft air cushion or LCACs, or 1 landing craft utility also known as LCU. There are multiple vehicle decks and over 38,000 square feet of space to store a variety of amphibious assault vehicles. But the particular ship that I'm on is much more unique because it's made up of something very special. 7.5 tons of steel from the rubbles of the World Trade Center were actually melted and casted into the ship's bow during its construction. This is USS New York, a ship that was named in the honor of the victims of the September 11 attacks in New York City. And to bring it full circle, the ship is sailing from Norfolk to New York City to celebrate Veterans Day 2023. One of the really cool things about this class of ships is their stealthy design. On radar, San Antonio ships look smaller than they actually are. This stealth capability is due to the slant that's prevalent throughout the ship's design, starting with these 2 giant masts. These ships were the first to incorporate the advanced enclosed mast system. 2 giant structures in the middle of the ship house communications and radar antennas, while keeping the ship's radar cross-section to a minimum. We actually brought a bag of popcorn kernels on board to put inside the mast and see if they would pop. But unfortunately, we couldn't test it. We were told the radiation was too powerful up inside the mast, but we were reassured that we could indeed make popcorn if we could go in. The towers are made of special materials that permits the ship's own sensor frequencies with very low loss while reflecting other frequencies. But notice how each side of the mast is slanted upward. This way, any external signals that are reflected back bounce upward instead of going straight back, reducing the amount of signals that radar receivers would pick up, which in turn minimizes the ship's radar cross-section. Interestingly, this upward slant design was everywhere on the exterior of the ship, For example, all the doors on the inside are installed vertically as you'd expect, but exterior doors are all slanted. The railings on the perimeter of the ship are also installed at an angle. Even the steps on the ladders follow the same principle. And of course, the sides of the ship's hull are no exception. Switching from the exterior design to the interior, USS New York is also a floating museum. This metal plaque that now bears the name of the ship was salvaged from the ruins of the World Trade Center and installed on the ship. USS New York and her sister ships, USS Arlington and USS Somerset, are floating museums that have many references to New York City. And just like the Marines that they carry, these ships are the Swiss Army knife of the US Navy. It's true that San Antonio-class LPDs have been involved in missions like recovering NASA's Orion spacecraft from the ocean in 2022, and also transporting captured terrorists from the Middle East to the United States for trial. But the primary mission of these ships is to take 800 Marines and their equipment close to their destination, and then transport them to land with the help of landing craft and various aircraft operated by the US Marine Corps. There are also 360 sailors on board who take care of everything on the ship. San Antonio ships could go underway as part of a 3-ship amphibious ready group, or they could sail alone, which is why LPDs are equipped with 2 REM 116 RAM missile launchers for point defense against anti-ship missiles. Each launcher sits on a set of giant springs that act as shock absorbers. This ship is not equipped with surface-to-surface missiles, but it could carry a HIMARS. This was in fact tested on USS Anchorage in 2017, where missiles were launched right off the flight deck of the ship. Remember those Ospreys? It just happened that one of them stayed on the flight deck of USS New York and got folded up. So the next morning, I had the opportunity to check her out. Without any cargo on board, Ospreys can transport 24 Marine combat troops, which is what these seats are for. Where the Osprey really shines is long-range vertical assault and extraction. It's faster and has a longer range than any existing military helicopter, and it can hover, something that airplanes cannot do. Even though Ospreys can fly horizontally, they can't land horizontally like an airplane does, because their rotor blades have a diameter of 38.1 feet, so big that the blades would hit the ground before the landing gear does. See that at the tip of the blade? It's an LED light that can be turned on at night. This makes it easier to see the perimeter of the blades as they spin. It's purely for safety, which is especially useful when 2 Ospreys are operating in proximity on this flight deck at night. Given the primary mission of LPDs, there are also a number of design features specifically with Marines in mind. There's a 124-bed state-of-the-art hospital on board the ship, equipped with X-ray machines and 2 operating rooms. LPDs have much larger hospitals compared to aircraft carriers, and that's because Marines are at a much higher risk of injury due to the nature of their job. Even the dining tables in the officers' mess hall are large, so if needed, they could be used as makeshift hospital beds. If you've ever been on any naval ship, you would know they have quite narrow hallways, and LPDs are no exception. But The passageways that lead to the flight deck are much wider, so Marines with all their gear could be on standby in these hallways before they're transported to shore on Ospreys. This wide passageway is pretty special, which is why every LPD has a unique name for it. On USS Fort Lauderdale, it's called I-95, named after the highway that goes south to the city of Fort Lauderdale. I'm on board USS New York, and here, the passageway is called Broadway. The walls are decorated with dozens of posters from Broadway shows. And not just that, they even have the Broadway lights. But these lights are not for show. San Antonio ships can house 2 LCACs at the same time. When an LCAC approaches to enter the ship, the stern gate opens up. But the LCAC and the ship first need to communicate on when the craft can go in. Greenwell means the ship would not be maneuvering, so the LCAC can safely go in. But aside from radio, the LPDs can also use these green blinking lights, in addition or as a backup to the Greenwell signal on the radio. LCACs are cushioned monsters. For reference, I'm 6'3". They can go from sitting to hovering in less than 2 seconds and are quite fast and maneuverable. The sand blowing into my face as the LCAC turns gives you an idea about the amount of thrust that its giant propellers generate. And for anyone who's suspicious, LCACs really do hover. I could clearly see through the skirt, and yes, I did ask for consent before recording her. But what happens if that skirt rips? Under the skirt, there's a smooth and shiny hull, just like a boat hull. If the LCAC wants to stay in place in water for extended periods of time, she can just shut off her engines, sit down and float just like a boat. But because LCACs don't displace any water when they're hovering, they're said to be flying, and they must turn on blinking lights when operating, just like airplanes do. Besides damage to the LCAC's skirt, another common problem is caused by salt, which can corrode the metal, and sand, which can get everywhere and cause problems. To deal with this, there is a washing station at the Little Creek Naval Base, so when LCACs come back from their mission, they're rinsed with fresh water. Operating an LCAC might look like fun, but LCAC pilots are not getting paid to have fun. The toughest part of their job is to get the vehicle inside the well deck of a moving ship without scratching it. There's only about a foot of clearance on either side, so it takes a lot of skill to do this. Once inside, the LCAC is chained up, so the motion of the ocean doesn't move her around inside the well deck. And because we just came in, the LCAC needs to be rinsed with fresh water, which is a rare commodity in the middle of the ocean. This is why the ship is equipped with a reverse osmosis system, which not only generates drinking water for those on board, but also enough water to wash LCACs and other vehicles as needed. In case you're wondering, this is not the rock climbing part of the gym. This guy is placing these large bolts to secure the stern gate. One thing that I found interesting was that no matter who I talked to, they told me they had the best job on the ship. It didn't matter if it was someone who worked on the bridge and was in charge of navigation, or someone who worked in the most unassuming parts of the ship, like the steering area, where one has to climb and crawl through tight spaces in order to check and maintain the hydraulic systems that move the ship's massive 50,000-pound rudders. Or those who worked in the engine room, located multiple floors below sea level, where it was hot and noisy. But they're having fun, and we're proud of their work. Speaking of pride,
My name is Richard Othmer, and I joined the Navy in 1974.
after serving in the U.S. Navy, Richie joined the New York City Fire Department and was a firefighter when 9/11 happened.
Many years later, they were going to commission the USS New York, and I happened to be on the commissioning committee.
And so Richie, Carl, and two other firefighter friends, Tom and Georgie, had an idea.
We got together and we picked up this piece of steel from a flange, from an I-beam flange from the World Trade Center, to honor the firemen, the police, NYPD, the DNY, and the Port Authority police, but also the U.S. Marines and the United States Navy sailors that were going to be manning the ship, because it tied us all together as Americans.
It was really special to run into Richie and hear his story.
Ironically, it's 14 years ago to this day when the ship was commissioned, November 7th, 2009, so it's kind of nice that you guys asked to talk about this today. I think the God...
The design of San Antonio class reflects the realization that in order to accomplish a mission, quality of life for those on board is just as critical as the technology they use. This is why all systems were designed for 90% American male and female population. For example, the watertight doors were designed to be operated by 25 pounds of force, meaning that the physical effort to secure the door was within 90% of the physical range of those on board. Similarly, the bunk beds are designed to comfortably accommodate 90% of the crew. Now, if your height is in the 96th percentile, which is 6'3", you may not be able to lie down as comfortably in the bunk beds. But don't worry, this class was the first to feature sit-up berthing areas, which is pretty handy if you want to sit up to read a book or write a letter. Although the top bunk doesn't have the sit-up feature, and that's what juniors get. The ratio of showers to troops and heads to troops was also improved on LPDs. Prior to 1994, women could only serve on support and non-combat ships, which is why as soon as women were allowed to serve on the U.S. Navy's surface combatants, the quality of life was improved for men, but not for the reasons that you might think. At the time, females had a larger seaback allowance, which meant they needed to have bigger lockers. So it was thanks to the ladies that San Antonio ships were the first surface combatants designed to have larger lockers for women and for men. During nighttime operations, the bridge lights are kept to a minimum while only using red lights, because red dissipates much quicker than white light. One of the things that I really got to appreciate while underway was the quality of the sky at night. Out in the ocean, far away from land, there is no light pollution, so the sky is absolutely magnificent. But just imagine if somebody fell into the water when it's pitch black. Except for, I didn't have to imagine it.
I'm aboard the port side.
It was just a man overboard exercise, so they did a head count to see if anyone's missing. To mark the rough location of the man overboard, a light and smoke signal was thrown in the water. The ship then performed a Williamson turn to pass by the target and simulate a pickup by the divers. We're told that the chances of survival will be over 70% during the day, but at night it's a different story. As you can see, even the light would disappear for a few seconds behind the swells, let alone a person, making their chances of survival less than 20%. The San Antonio class is now considered to be reliable and successful, but when the class initially hit the water, it was off to a rocky start. The first 5 ships had issues with engines, pipes cracking, and problems with the weapon systems, to name a few. So in 2008, the US Navy assigned a strike team to address these class-wide issues, which took 3 years to resolve. It wasn't until the 6th ship that the sea trial went without any major flaws. As the problems were solved, the US Navy recognized the potential of this class and actually increased the number of ships on order from 11 to 13. Well, that's all great, but it doesn't explain why the US Navy is now building the second iteration of this class, known as Flight 2, to be less capable and less survivable than the original Flight 1. Flight 2 is designed to be a scaled-down version of the original San Antonio class, because it will be replacing older Whidbey Island class and Harper's Ferry class dock landing ships, or LSDs. Instead of designing a replacement class for the LSD ships from scratch and going through all the pains of identifying and fixing the problems that would inevitably come up, the US Navy decided to take a different approach. The idea was to take the already mature class of San Antonio ships and remove some of the higher-end features from the design in order to make an affordable amphibious truck. Building a new ship on an existing hull is not a new idea. Ticonderoga cruisers were built on top of existing Spruance-class destroyer hull. Similarly, multiple flights of Arleigh Burke destroyers were built on the same hull. Some of the features that have been eliminated in the Flight 2 design include replacing the iconic enclosed composite masts with traditional ones. Having enclosed masts increases the sail area of the ship, meaning that when the ship's traveling in winds of greater than 15 knots, it experiences a twisting effect, which makes it difficult to stay on course when traveling at lower speeds. This could be especially challenging during underway replenishment, where San Antonio ship's difficulty with staying on course is combined with the suction effect that all ships experience when moving along in close proximity to another ship. They just have to be a lot more conservative in their approach. In addition to replacing the enclosed masts on the Flight 2, the hangar would be made smaller, and the size of the hospital will be cut in half. In fact, the state-of-the-art medical facilities on Flight 1 were so good that the hull is being considered to replace the US Navy's 2 aging hospital ships, USNS Mercy and USNS Comfort. The kicker is that even after heavily simplifying the design, Flight 2 would still be more capable than the ships that it's going to be replacing. The experience of sailing on USS New York was an absolute blast. I learned so much new stuff, but I'm curious, what did you find the most fascinating? Drop us a comment, and if you want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing to Not What You Think.
ये बेडशीट कुशन तकिए वगैरह के लिए ना ये चौकोर पट्टियाँ बनती हैं, तो जोड़ जोड़ के ना ये इनको ना आप ठीक है, फिर मैं आपको सिखाती हूँ। अब हमने ना इसमें से 5 लेने हैं। अब चैन में हमारा ना दरमियान वाला हिस्सा मुकम्मल हो गया। अब हमने फिर यहाँ से ना ऊपर का हिस्सा शुरू करना है इसका। ये देखिए इधर से हमने पहले हमने ना खोना शुरू करना है इसका। ये कोन तो तभी बनेगा ना कोने बना के। 3 लिए इधर से